He was disgusted by his albino daughter. He sold her to a mountain man who received a goddess. The price of my life as decreed by my own father was settled at 3 pack horses, a crate of preserved meat, and $2 silver. He didn't speak those words to me directly. He never addressed me unless it was to bark an order or curse my existence. I overheard it through the thin wooden wall of my room, his voice a harsh rasp, as he haggled with a fur trapper in the windswept Colorado territory within the bitter confines of Devil's Creek. Hello, my dear friend. This is Jasper Ashwood, your narrator of Mountain Tales. Before we start, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from. A big hug to you all, and I hope you enjoy the story. I was a living phantom at 19. My skin had never known the touch of a healthy tan. It was the pale, stark white of fresh snow on granite peaks. My hair wasn't golden, but a cascade of silver-white strands that seemed to capture starlight, and my eyes were the unsettling pale pink of winter roses, squinting against the harsh glare of mountain sun. I was Clara Beth Morrison, the albino girl, the town's spectral child. To my father Jacob, I was worse than a ghost. I was a monument to his disgrace, a walking reminder of the wife he'd buried in the frozen ground after my difficult birth. He looked at me and saw not a daughter, but a curse made flesh, a living affliction. His hatred was a tangible presence in our cramped log cabin, a cold that no hearth fire could ever truly banish. He believed I had stolen the life from my mother, and so he had spent 19 years stealing the life from me. There was, however, a memory I clung to like a dying ember, the faint, sweet echo of my mother's voice humming a mountain ballad. In that memory, her hand was gentle on my brow, a presence a healing balm. But I also remembered my father's silhouette in the doorway, his face like a thundercloud even then, his rage a poison that had seeped into the very foundation of our home long before my arrival. His disgust wasn't born solely of my appearance, it was an older, deeper rot, and I was simply the harvest he had chosen to blame for its bitterness. Now his solution was as swift as it was brutal. He would cut out the blight, he would sell me. The words I'd heard confirmed it. The trapper, a man named Ezra Kane, would be taking me into the high country to a mountain man for a handsome price. Jacob would finally be free of his burden. The morning he cast me out, he looked at me one final time, his eyes holding a chilling satisfaction. "A wild man is a fitting match for a creature like you," he sneered. "Perhaps the wilderness will finish what your mother's death started." He shoved me forward, out of the shadowed interior of the cabin, and into the brutal, unforgiving glare of the mountain sun, where the trapper who now owned me waited. "My journey into the unknown begins here. If you want to discover what destiny awaits me and believe that hope can flourish in the bleakest places, then stay with us." Leave a like on this video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single moment of this story. The journey began in silence. Ezra Kane, the trapper, did not speak to me. He simply gestured to a place on his wagon, his face as weathered and unreadable as the rocky peaks we slowly passed. The world I had known, a world of shadowed rooms and averted gazes, was replaced by the vast, punishing expanse of the Colorado mountains. The sun was a merciless hammer, and even beneath the canvas cover of the wagon the heat was stifling. I kept my head down, the brim of a borrowed hat doing little to shield my sensitive eyes from the blazing light. Every creak of the wagon wheels, every cry of a distant hawk, sent a tremor of fear through me. My father's words echoed in my mind, painting a terrifying picture of the savage I was being delivered to. I was a lamb being led to slaughter I couldn't comprehend, and my fear was a cold hard stone in my belly. For 3 days we traveled like this, a silent pair adrift in a sea of pine and granite. Mr. Kane was not cruel, but he was not kind either. He was a businessman who had concluded his transaction and was now simply delivering the goods. He offered me water from his canteen and shared his dried venison and hardtack, but his movements were efficient, his gaze distant. I was cargo. Less than human, more than livestock, but cargo all the same. I huddled into myself, trying to become as small and unnoticeable as possible, a pale ghost haunting the edge of his world. On the 3rd night, the air cooled with the suddenness of a held breath released. The stars in the blackness above were not the familiar distant specks I knew from Devil's Creek. They were a brilliant, blazing cascade of diamonds so close I felt I could reach out and touch them. We made camp in the shelter of a rock formation that looked like a giant sleeping bear. Mr. Kane built a small fire, its flames dancing and casting long, flickering shadows. He handed me a tin cup of coffee and a piece of jerky, and for the first time, he truly looked at me. His eyes, accustomed to judging the value of pelts, seemed to be taking a different kind of measure. "You're bound for Timber Ridge," he said, his voice rough from the mountain air. "Home to Caleb McKinnon." I flinched at the name, clutching the cup so tightly my knuckles ached. He saw it and let out a slow sigh, poking the fire with a stick. "The man you're to marry. His name is Caleb," he paused, letting the name settle in the air between us. "He's a mountain man, been living alone up there for nigh on 4 years since his wife died birthing their first child. Lost both of them in one cruel winter." My mind reeled. A mountain man. A widower. This was a person. A man with a history, a loss. It was a detail too specific for the faceless monsters of my father's tales. Mr. Kane looked away from the fire and back to me, his expression serious. "He knows what you look like, girl. Word travels even up in them peaks. He sent a runner down to my trading post 3 months back asking about the pale woman in Devil's Creek." I stared at him, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a random purchase. It was a specific request. He knows," I whispered, the words barely audible. Mr. Kane nodded. "He does, and you need to understand something. Where you come from, they see a curse, an ill omen." He leaned forward slightly, the firelight catching the weathered planes of his face. "Caleb, he doesn't see that. Mountain folk believe what's rare is a gift from the Great Spirit. They don't see skin like spoiled milk. They see the color of fresh snow on sacred peaks. They don't see hair like an old crone's. They see strands of pure moonbeams. He doesn't believe he bought a cursed bride, Clara Beth. He believes he's been sent an angel." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. An angel. The concept was so foreign, so utterly contrary to the 19 years of my existence, that I couldn't process it. All my life I had been a blemish, a stain, a thing of shame to be hidden away. To think that the very features that marked me as an outcast could be seen as a sign of divine favor was like being told water flowed uphill. It shattered the cold certainty of my own worthlessness, leaving me adrift in a sea of possibility I had never dared imagine. I didn't sleep that night. I sat wrapped in my blanket, watching the embers of the fire die, and for the first time, the stone of fear in my belly began to dissolve, replaced by something far more terrifying and fragile, a flicker of hope. The final day of our journey felt different. We began to climb, leaving the lower valleys behind for the true high country. The air grew thinner, cleaner. Aspen and pine trees dotted the landscape, their hardy green a welcome relief after the endless brown and grey. The world was coming alive around me. We navigated a narrow, winding trail, the rock walls rising high on either side, and then, as we rounded a final sharp bend, the trail opened up. Below us lay a hidden valley so pristine and beautiful it seemed impossible, a secret emerald world cradled by the harsh granite arms of the mountains. A crystal stream meandered through its center, and groves of aspen trees shimmered in the afternoon light. And there, nestled in the heart of that impossible green, I saw the thin, gentle column of smoke rising from a single cabin, reaching for the sky like a silent, welcoming prayer. As the wagon rolled into the valley, the world transformed. The oppressive silence of the lower country was replaced by the symphony of life. This was no grim, fearsome wilderness camp. It was a sanctuary, vibrant and alive. The air smelled of wood smoke, pine sap, and the sweet scent of mountain meadows. A few horses grazed peacefully in a natural corral, their ears pricked with gentle curiosity at our approach. Birds called from the trees, their songs a soft river of sound, in a language I did not know but somehow understood. I felt impossibly pale, impossibly fragile, a single white feather floating into a forest of rich, dark earth. My eyes searched the clearing, and I braced myself for the familiar sting of revulsion, the whispered insults, but they never came. Instead, there was a profound peace, a sense of sanctuary that stood in stark contrast to the brittle, angry silence of my father's cabin. Mr. Kane brought the wagon to a halt near a split-rail fence that enclosed a small garden. A man emerged from the cabin and walked toward us. As he approached, a hush seemed to fall over the valley, not from fear but from a deep respect for the natural order of things. He was tall, taller than my father, with a lean, powerful build that spoke of a life lived in harmony with the wilderness. He wore simple buckskin pants and a homespun shirt, his chest and shoulders powerful beneath the worn fabric. His skin was bronzed from years under the mountain sun, his dark hair tied back from a face that was strikingly handsome, carved with lines of both strength and a quiet, settled sorrow. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were not the eyes of a savage from my father's rantings. They were deep brown, intelligent, and held a wisdom that was as ancient as the peaks themselves. Mr. Kane dismounted, speaking to him in low tones. I couldn't follow all the words, but I caught fragments about the journey and the arrangement. The tall man listened patiently, his gaze never leaving me. He was Caleb. He had to be. When the trapper finished, Caleb took a slow step forward. I flinched, my body instinctively coiling, preparing for a harsh word or a rough hand. My entire life had been a lesson in anticipating pain from men in authority. But he stopped a respectful distance away, his movements deliberate and gentle. He looked at me, truly looked as if he were seeing a sunrise for the first time. In the depths of his eyes I saw not disgust, not anger, not even pity. I saw wonder. It was so unexpected, so utterly disarming, that it felt more threatening than any overt cruelty. Then he spoke, his voice a low baritone, not directed at Mr. Kane, but straight to my soul. "Snow Angel," he said, the words soft, yet carrying across the clearing. Later I would learn this was what he had chosen to call me, not from shame but from reverence. He gave me a new name with his first breath, a name born not of mockery but of awe. My mind couldn't accept it. Kindness from my father had always been a prelude to greater cruelty, a weapon to sharpen the eventual blow. I waited for the other shoe to drop, for the gentle expression to curdle into the familiar sneer of contempt. I remained silent, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Caleb saw the terror in my stillness, saw the way I held myself, braced for an impact that wasn't coming. A flicker of understanding crossed his face, and without another word to me he turned and gestured for me to follow. He led me away from the clearing to a small, well-built cabin set beneath the shade of towering pines. It was a solid structure of hewn logs and river stones, clean and sturdy with glass windows that caught the afternoon light. He stopped at the wooden door and turned back to me. "This will be your home," he said, his English clear and careful. "You will have peace here. You may rest. No one will enter without your leave." He looked at me, his gaze steady, searching for any sign that I understood. Then he simply nodded once, turned, and walked away, leaving me standing before the door of what he had just declared my sanctuary, my own home. I had never had a space that was truly my own. Hesitantly, I pushed open the door and stepped into the cool, dim interior. The floor was covered with soft fur rugs, a stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a comfortable bed was made up with clean wool blankets. Fresh water sat in a ceramic pitcher beside a wash basin, and wildflowers, mountain lupine and Indian paintbrush, sat in a simple clay jar on a rough-hewn table. I was alone. For the first time in my life, I was utterly alone, yet for the first time, I felt the unmistakable stirring of safety. The door was only wood and iron hinges, but it was a barrier I had been given permission to control. I sank down onto the furs, the sounds of the valley a gentle, muffled murmur outside, and I touched the smooth ceramic of the water pitcher, my entire being overwhelmed by a single terrifying thought. What if he was telling the truth? For 4 days, my world was the space within that cabin, and the small patch of earth framed by its windows. I was a creature in a burrow, peering out at a world I did not yet dare to enter. I watched the sun rise and paint the peaks in hues of gold and rose. I watched the daily rhythm of Caleb's life, a dance of purpose and self-sufficiency that was utterly foreign to me. He chopped wood with methodical precision, tended to his horses with gentle authority, and worked in his garden with the patient dedication of someone who understood the mountain seasons. I saw that he moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had found his place in the world, who had made peace with solitude, but carried it lightly. I saw Caleb from a distance. He moved with the quiet authority of a river, his presence guiding the flow of the valley without force. He never approached my cabin, never made any demands on my time, yet I often felt his gaze on me, a steady, watchful presence that was not possessive but patient. On the 4th morning, I opened the door to find a small, perfect cluster of purple mountain asters lying on the doorstep, their delicate blossoms a stark contrast to the weathered wood. I stared at it, my heart seizing with familiar suspicion. A gift? A trap? But the following day there was a stem of brilliant red Indian paintbrush, and the day after a spray of pale blue columbine. There were no notes, no words, just the silent offering of wild, fragile beauty. Someone was noticing my quiet love for the wildflowers that grew so tenaciously in the rocky soil. Someone saw me, not just my pale skin, but the direction of my gaze, the things that brought a flicker of light to my haunted eyes. It was on the 6th day that a woman approached my cabin directly. She was perhaps 10 years older than I, with a kind, weathered face and eyes that held the same deep warmth as the valley itself. She carried a wooden bowl of fragrant stew, rich with venison and wild onions. She stopped a few feet from my doorway and simply held it out, her smile gentle and unassuming. I knew somehow that this was Sarah, Caleb's nearest neighbor, a widow who lived in a smaller cabin about a mile downstream. Hesitantly, I stepped out and took the bowl, my fingers brushing against hers. I murmured a thank you, the words feeling clumsy and loud. She just nodded, her smile widening, and pointed to herself. "Sarah," she said. Then she pointed to me. I swallowed hard. "Clara Beth," I whispered. She tried the name, her pronunciation soft and melodic. Then she smiled again. "Snow Angel," she said with a gentle final nod, as if to say, "That is who you are here." And in that moment, I felt the first thread of connection, a fragile bridge built of warm stew and a shared name. Sarah began to visit every day, sometimes with food, sometimes just to sit quietly nearby while she mended a shirt or worked on a piece of beadwork. We spoke little, our lives too different for easy conversation, but we communicated in the universal tongue of shared presence. Her young nephew, a boy of about 6 named Tommy, was often with her. For days he had been plagued by a persistent cough that rattled his small frame and left him breathless. The nearest doctor was a 3-day ride away, and Sarah had been treating him with willow bark tea, but the cough clung to him stubbornly. One afternoon, as Tommy fell into another coughing fit, I saw a familiar plant growing near the stream bank, a weed with broad fuzzy leaves that my mother had called mullein. A memory, sharp and clear, surfaced from the fog of my childhood. My mother crushing these same leaves, mixing them with bear grease to make a soothing salve for my chest when I was sick. The knowledge was there, a dormant seed planted long ago, but to act on it felt like a terrifying risk. In Devil's Creek, such knowledge would have been called witchcraft. My father would have beaten me for it. Here, what would they think? That I was trying to poison the boy? My hands trembled, but then I looked at Sarah's worried face, at Tommy's exhausted eyes, and a new feeling warred with the old fear, the desire to help, to be useful, to give something back for the kindness I had been shown. That evening I slipped out and gathered the leaves. I crushed them between 2 smooth stones and mixed them with a little lard Sarah had given me. My heart pounding, I approached her cabin. I held out the small greasy poultice, pointed to Tommy, then to my own chest, and made the motion of rubbing it in, mimicking the sound of a deep, clear breath. Sarah looked from the strange concoction to my face. She saw the fear in my eyes, but she must have seen the earnestness too. She took a leap of faith. She took the salve from my hands, and with a trusting nod, began to gently rub it onto her nephew's chest. I fled back to my cabin, certain I had made a terrible mistake. But the next morning Sarah came to my door and Tommy was with her. He was breathing easily, the racking cough silenced. He looked up at me and gave me a shy, gap-toothed grin. Sarah's eyes shone with a gratitude so profound it left me speechless. She took my hands in hers and squeezed them, speaking soft words that I did not need to understand to feel their meaning. The news spread, not like wildfire but like the slow, steady warmth of a hearth. The few other mountain families in the area began to see me differently. I was not just the strange snow angel Caleb had brought to the valley. I was the woman whose hands knew the secrets of the healing plants. They started bringing me things, a root to inspect, a leaf to smell. I began a small garden behind my cabin, transplanting the wildflowers Caleb left for me and the herbs I recognized. I knelt in the dirt, my hands covered in the rich soil of the valley, and I felt the hard shell of shame I had carried for so long begin to crack. I was not a curse. I was not an angel. I was a planter of seeds in a place that was impossibly beginning to feel like home. Several weeks passed, settling into a rhythm as gentle as the stream flowing through the valley. My garden flourished under my care, a vibrant patch of color and life that became my sanctuary. The daily gifts of wildflowers had ceased, replaced by something far more meaningful, quiet conversations. Caleb had begun to teach me about the mountains, and I in turn shared what little book learning I possessed. Our talks were brief, often taking place in the presence of Sarah, but they were threads of connection, weaving our 2 worlds together, 1 word at a time. The mountain families now greeted me with warm smiles, and the children no longer stared at my skin, but at the bright blossoms I sometimes tucked into their hair. The constant gnawing fear that had been my lifelong companion had finally receded, leaving in its place a quiet, watchful peace. I was no longer cargo, I was no longer a curse. I was Snow Angel, the woman with the healing hands, the keeper of the garden. But a space still remained between myself and Caleb, a respectful distance that was both a comfort and a question. One evening, as twilight bled purple and orange across the sky, he approached my cabin alone. The valley was settling down for the night, the sounds of the day softening to a gentle murmur. "Snow Angel," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble. I looked up from the basket I was weaving. "Will you walk with me?" It was not a command, but a genuine question, an invitation. My heart gave a sudden sharp leap. This was different from our shared lessons. This felt personal. I nodded, my throat suddenly too tight for words, and followed him as he led me away from the clearing along a narrow path that followed the stream upstream. He walked slowly, accommodating my pace, his presence beside me a silent, reassuring warmth. He led me to a place I had not yet seen, a small hidden pool where the water collected deep and still, reflecting the star-dusted sky like a piece of fallen night. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine needles. For a long time we stood in comfortable silence, listening to the gentle lapping of the water and the song of the night insects. "Your garden," he said finally, his gaze fixed on the water's shimmering surface. "It brings much beauty to this valley. You have a gift for making things grow." I looked at my hands, still faintly stained with soil. I just like to see things live," I managed to say. He turned to face me, and in the dim light I could see the deep sorrow that still lived behind his eyes, a shadow that his quiet strength could not entirely conceal. "My wife, Rebecca," he began, the name spoken with soft reverence. "She also had this gift. Her spirit was in the corn, in the beans, in the wild roses that grew by our door. When she walked on, it was as if the color faded from the valley. The earth itself seemed to mourn her." He paused, his honesty a raw, vulnerable thing. "For 4 winters, my heart was a barren field. I did my duties, tended my traps, but I felt no life within me." He took a breath and looked directly at me, his gaze so intense it felt as if he were seeing into my very soul. And then the traders brought stories. They spoke of a woman in a town of dust and cruelty, a woman with skin like fresh snow who was treated like a weed to be pulled up and discarded. But I did not hear a story of a weed. Snow Angel. I heard the story of a flower that could grow in the cracks of stone, a spirit that endured the harshest winter and refused to die. I knew then. I knew that a spirit like that would understand how to bring life back to a barren field. His words undid me. All my life my story had been one of shame. He had taken that same story, that same pain, and reframed it as a testament to my strength. Tears I hadn't even known were there pricked my eyes. The truth of my past, a poison I had held in for so long, rose to my lips. "No one has ever seen strength in me," I whispered, my voice trembling. "They saw a mistake, a ghost. My father, he told me my existence was an insult to my mother's memory." The confession hung in the air, a lifetime of pain distilled into a few broken sentences. Caleb did not speak. Instead, he reached out and gently, tentatively, laid his hand over mine, where it rested on a smooth stream stone. It was the first time he had touched me. The contact was not one of passion or possession, but of pure grounding connection. It was a current of warmth that flowed up my arm and settled directly in my heart, calming its frantic beat. "A man who looks at fresh snow and complains of the cold," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is not seeing the mountain. He is seeing the blindness in his own soul. Your father was blind." With those words he did not just comfort me, he freed me. He took the burden of my father's shame and exposed it for what it was, a failing not in me, but in him. We walked back to the valley in a new kind of silence, no longer separated by a question, but joined by a shared understanding. When he left me at my cabin, he paused and simply held my gaze. The respectful distance was gone. The fear was gone. And as I watched him walk away into the moonlit dark, I knew with a certainty that shook me to my core that the fragile hope I had been nurturing had finally blossomed into something that felt terrifyingly and wonderfully like love. The weeks that followed were like a slow, beautiful sunrise. The space between Caleb and me closed, filled with shared moments that wove the fabric of our lives together. He taught me to ride, his strong, patient hands guiding mine on the reins atop a gentle mare. I discovered a sense of freedom I had never imagined, the wind whipping through my hair as we rode through the valley that was now my world. In the evenings we would sit by the fire, and he would share the stories of the mountains, tales of bears and wolves, of harsh winters survived and springs celebrated. I, in turn, told him of the worlds I had only visited in the few books I'd managed to read in secret, stories of distant oceans and cities beyond the frontier. He listened with rapt attention that made me feel, for the first time, that my own thoughts had value. I worked alongside Sarah and learned the rhythm of mountain life, preserving meat for winter, making soap from ash and fat, spinning wool from the sheep that grazed in high meadows. They taught me their crafts, and I shared with them the simple cooking and sewing skills I knew. I was no longer an observer in their world. I was part of its weave, my pale thread strengthening the pattern. One evening, he led me once again to our quiet pool by the stream. The moon was nearly full, casting a brilliant silver path across the still water. He did not speak for a long time, but his silence was full of purpose. From a leather pouch at his belt, he took something and held it out to me. It was a necklace, not of gold or silver, but of something far more precious. It was made of intricately carved beads of pine wood, interspersed with small, perfectly polished stones from the stream bed. It was a piece of the valley itself, shaped by his own hands. "Snow Angel," he said, his voice low and steady. "When you came to this valley, you were a seed planted in hope. I have watched you grow, sinking your roots into our earth, reaching for the sun. You have healed the broken ground of my own heart." He took a step closer, his eyes searching mine. "I no longer wish to watch you from my cabin. I wish to share it with you. I no longer wish to be just your protector. I wish to be your husband. Be my wife, Snow Angel. Be the heart that beats beside mine." Tears streamed freely down my face, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were a release, a cleansing rain. I looked at the beautiful, earnest man before me, the man who had seen a flower where everyone else had seen a weed. "I was sold into this life, Caleb," I said, my voice thick but strong. "I was sent here as a piece of property, a shameful burden to be discarded." I reached out and gently touched his face. "But now I choose it freely, and with all of my heart. I choose you." His name was a vow on my lips. "Yes, I will be your wife." Our wedding was not a grand affair, but a ceremony so sacred and beautiful it felt as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath to watch. Sarah and the women helped me prepare. They bathed me in water infused with fragrant sage and dressed me in a simple dress of the softest white doe skin. Instead of a veil, they wove tiny wildflowers from my own garden into my silver hair. As the sun began to dip below the western peaks, casting the valley in fiery light, I walked to the central clearing where the few mountain families were gathered. Caleb was waiting for me, dressed in his finest buckskins adorned with simple beadwork that told the story of his lineage. As I reached him, old Samuel, the eldest among us, raised a worn Bible and began to speak a blessing, his voice rising and falling like the mountain wind. Caleb took my hands in his. He spoke no promises of ownership or obedience, but of partnership. He vowed to be the shelter that protected me, the ground that supported me, and the provider who would see to our needs. I in turn vowed to be the heart of our home, the keeper of its fire, and the partner who would stand beside him in all seasons. Then Sarah and Samuel came forward with a single large quilt, woven with the symbols of mountain life, pine trees, eagles, and running water. They wrapped it around both our shoulders, binding us together. We were no longer two people, but one family, sheltered by the same covering. We drank from a single tin cup of clear stream water, sealing our vow to share all that life would offer. The ceremony ended, and the small gathering erupted in joyous calls and music. A great feast began, and as I stood beside my husband, wrapped in the warmth of our shared quilt, I looked out at the smiling faces, at the dancing firelight, at the brilliant moon rising over the peaks. The lonely, ghost-like girl from Devil's Creek was gone forever. I was Snow Angel, wife of Caleb. I was home. The next 7 months were the most peaceful of my life. The love that had blossomed in the twilight by the stream settled into the deep, quiet rhythm of marriage. Our cabin became a home, filled not with silence and fear, but with shared work, soft laughter, and the steady presence of mutual respect. Caleb's strength was the mountain that sheltered me, and he in turn told me that my spirit was the garden that had brought his heart back to life. I was no longer just Snow Angel, the strange pale woman. I was Snow Angel, wife of Caleb, a woman of the high country. My hands, once pale and useless, were now skilled in preparing food, working leather and tending the sick. My voice, once a timid whisper, now sang the old ballads Sarah taught me. and my feet knew the paths of the valley as well as they had once known the floorboards of my father's cabin. The shame he had branded onto my soul had been washed away by a tide of acceptance and love, leaving behind only a faint, silvery scar. I was happy. It was a simple, profound truth, one that I had never believed I would have the right to claim. The peace was shattered on a crisp afternoon in late autumn. The air was sharp, and the scent of wood smoke filled the valley. A cry went up from the ridge trail, and moments later a rider galloped into the clearing, his horse lathered in sweat. He slid from its back before it had even stopped, running straight for Caleb. They spoke in urgent, low tones. I watched from our cabin, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The rider's panic was an alien thing in our tranquil valley. I saw Caleb's face harden, his posture shifting from peaceful husband to resolute protector. He dismissed the rider and strode toward me, his expression grim. "A group of soldiers is coming up the mountain," he said, his voice level, betraying none of the alarm the rider had shown. 12 of them. They are moving slowly, but they will be here before sunset. My heart hammered against my ribs. Soldiers. The world I had left behind, the world of uniforms and laws that had never protected me, was invading my sanctuary. "Why?" I whispered. Caleb's dark eyes held mine. "The rider said they have a guide, a white man who knows these trails. He said the man is tall with a voice like grinding stones and a beard black as a raven's wing." The description struck me like a physical blow. Every cell in my body went cold. There was only one man it could be. "Jacob," I breathed the name, tasting like ash in my mouth. "My father, he's come." The old familiar terror, the instinct to run, to hide, to make myself small and invisible, surged through me with the force of an avalanche. My hands began to tremble. I could feel his hateful gaze on me even from miles away. I wanted to crawl back into the dark safety of the cabin and never come out. But then I felt Caleb's hand on my shoulder, his touch firm and grounding. I looked up into his face and saw no fear, only a calm, unshakable resolve. I looked past him and saw Sarah standing in the doorway of her cabin, her expression not of fear, but of fierce, protective anger. I saw the men of the valley gathering, their courage, their loyalty to their friend and his wife written on their faces. They were not afraid. They were my family. And the strength they gave me, the strength Caleb had shown me I already possessed, rose up to meet the terror and beat it back. The trembling in my hands stilled. I lifted my chin. "I will not hide from him, Caleb," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I am not that frightened girl in his dark cabin anymore. I am your wife. I will stand with you." A look of immense pride softened the hard lines of his face. He nodded once. "I would expect nothing less from my snow angel," he said. "He has no power here. This is our home." He gave his orders, and the valley prepared. It was not a preparation for war, but for a confrontation of wills. The women quietly gathered the children and led them to the safety of the back cabins. The men of the valley, 8 strong, gathered in the central clearing. They held their rifles loosely, their stance not aggressive but unyielding. They formed a silent human wall before the entrance to our home. Caleb stood at their head, and I stood beside him, his hand holding mine. We waited. The sun bled towards the horizon, painting the sky in angry streaks of red and orange. The cheerful sounds of the valley were gone, replaced by a tense, heavy silence, broken only by the rustle of wind in the pines. Then we heard it, the clatter of iron-shod hooves on stone, the jingle of military bridles, the sound of my past marching to destroy my present. They emerged from the tree line, a column of blue-coated soldiers, their faces grim and tired. And riding at their head on a fine black horse I suspected my own sale had paid for was my father, Jacob Morrison. His face was just as I remembered it, a mask of cruel arrogance. His eyes swept over the silent line of mountain men, and then they found me. A sneer of triumph twisted his lips, a look that said, "I have found you, creature, and now I will drag you back to your cage." My father did not speak to me. He addressed the young, weary-looking sergeant at his side, his voice booming with false righteousness that echoed across the clearing. "You see, Sergeant, there she is, just as I told you. These savages have her captive. She is my daughter, my property, and I demand you use the authority of the United States Army to retrieve her immediately." He pointed a thick finger at me, his face contorted in manufactured outrage. The word property hung in the air, a final desperate attempt to chain me to my past. Caleb tensed beside me, a low growl rumbling in his chest, but I placed a calming hand on his arm. "No," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying with a clarity that surprised even myself. "This is mine to answer." I took a single step forward, away from the protective line of mountain men, to stand alone. I met my father's furious gaze without flinching. "I am not your property, Jacob Morrison," I said, my voice even and strong. "I was never your daughter in anything but blood. You speak of captivity, but the only cage I've ever known was the dark, silent cabin you kept me in for 19 years. A murmur went through the line of soldiers. They had come expecting to find a helpless victim. They were not prepared for a woman who spoke with such conviction. "Lies! Witchcraft!" my father bellowed, his face turning a blotchy red. "They have twisted your mind." I gave a small, sad shake of my head. "My mind is clearer than it has ever been," I continued, my voice rising slightly to meet his. "You speak of kidnapping, but I remember a transaction. I remember the price Ezra Kane paid you. 3 horses, a crate of preserved meat, and $2 silver. You didn't lose a daughter that day, Father. You sold one. You cast me out believing you were sending me to my death. You have no rights here. You sold them for the price of good livestock." The utter, unadorned truth of it stunned him into momentary silence. He opened his mouth to retort, to spew more venom, but another voice cut through the air. It was Sarah. She stepped forward to stand beside me, her chin held high. "She is no witch," Sarah said, her English clear and deliberate. "She is Snow Angel. When my nephew was sick with fever, it was her hands that soothed him. When the frost threatened our crops, it was her knowledge that saved them. She does not take life, she nurtures it." Then another man, old Samuel, stepped forward on my other side. "I have lived for 72 winters," he said, his voice raspy but firm, his eyes fixed on the sergeant. "I have seen the hearts of many people. The heart of this woman is good. She carries herself with honor, and she has learned our ways with respect. She has brought peace to our valley. She is not a captive. She is the heart of our friend." One by one, others from the valley added their voices. A young trapper spoke of how I had taught his wife to read. A woman spoke of how I had shared my blanket with her when hers was lost in a fire. They were not grand testimonies, but a simple, overwhelming flood of small truths. Each one was a stone in a wall that my father could not breach. His narrative of a kidnapped, bewitched girl was crumbling to dust before his eyes, replaced by the reality of a beloved, respected woman surrounded by her family. My father was left sputtering, his accusations turning to incoherent rage. His authority, built on lies and cruelty, had no purchase here. The sergeant had seen enough. He looked from my father's hateful, contorted face to me standing calm and protected between my friends. He saw the unwavering solidarity of the mountain people. He saw the truth. He turned his horse slightly, addressing my father with a tone of cool finality. "Sir, it is clear to me that this woman is in no distress. She is the wife of this mountain man, and by all appearances she is here of her own free will. This is a family dispute, not a military matter. The United States Army will not be used as your personal enforcement. We are leaving." The words struck Jacob like a physical blow. Defeat washed over his face, leaving it slack and pale. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with venomous, impotent hatred. But it couldn't touch me anymore. The power he once held over me was broken, shattered into 1,000 pieces. I felt nothing for him now, but a deep, weary pity. The sergeant gave a curt nod to Caleb, a silent gesture of respect, then turned his column of soldiers around. They escorted my father with them, a disgraced and defeated man, his evil finally rendered powerless. As they disappeared into the trees, Caleb wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a fierce embrace. The people of the valley closed in around us, not with loud celebration, but with a quiet, powerful presence that was more comforting than any cheer. I leaned my head against my husband's chest and took a deep, shuddering breath of clean mountain air, the first truly free breath of my entire life. With my father's departure, the last ghost of my past was finally laid to rest. His memory, which had haunted my every waking moment for 19 years, lost its power. It was no longer a looming spectre, but a faint, pathetic echo that was quickly carried away by the mountain wind. In the days that followed, a new kind of peace settled over the valley, a peace that was deeper and more resilient for having been tested. The love between Caleb and me, already strong, was forged anew in the crucible of that confrontation, becoming something unbreakable. There were no more shadows between us, no more unspoken fears. There was only the simple, profound truth of our life together, a life I had not merely accepted, but had fought for and claimed as my own. The seasons turned. The vibrant golds and reds of autumn gave way to the quiet, cleansing white of winter. Snow blanketed the valley, muffling the world in sacred silence. In the warmth of our cabin, Caleb and I spent the long nights sharing stories, dreams, and the comfortable silence of two people whose souls are in perfect harmony. He taught me the complete history of the mountains, the names of all the constellations that wheeled across the frozen night sky. I read to him from a worn book of Shakespeare I had managed to keep, my voice giving life to words of love and beauty written in a world he had never seen. When spring arrived, it was with a triumphant burst of life. The stream swelled with melted snow, the aspens grew new, tender green leaves, and my garden exploded with a riot of color, as if celebrating the renewal of the world. And it was then, in the midst of all that new life, that I began to sense a new life stirring within me. It was a subtle change at first, a new tenderness, a slight weariness in the afternoons. But my body, which had once been a source of shame, was now speaking a language of miracles that I was finally beginning to understand. One morning I was kneeling in my garden, my hands in the rich, dark earth, when a wave of certainty washed over me so powerful it took my breath away. I was carrying a child. Later that day I asked Caleb to walk with me. I led him to the garden, to the place where the wildflowers grew thickest. I didn't speak. I simply took his large, warm hand and placed it gently over my still, flat belly. He stilled, his eyes searching mine. He saw the truth there before any word was spoken. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of such pure, unadulterated joy that it seemed to outshine the sun. He knelt before me, placing his other hand beside mine, his touch filled with a reverence that humbled me. "Snow Angel," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You have brought the spring back to this valley, and now you carry its future." The news was received by the valley not just as a private joy, but as a blessing upon the entire community. Sarah wept with happiness, embracing me tightly. The elders nodded with deep satisfaction. This child, our child, was a living symbol of hope, a bridge between two worlds, a sign that the mountain people would continue, their bloodline strengthened by a love that had defied all odds. My story, the strange tale of the white woman sold to the mountain man, began to change. It was no longer just a curious event. It became a legend told by the grandmothers around the evening fires. They told of the snow angel who arrived in the valley as a pale ghost, sold in shame, carrying the weight of a cruel world on her shoulders. But they told of her strength, her kindness, her healing hands, and how she had faced down the darkness of her past and had chosen to become the heart of their community. The woman once cast out as a curse now carried the future in her womb. Standing with Caleb one evening, watching the full moon rise over the peaks, his arm wrapped securely around me and my hands resting on the gentle swell of new life, I finally understood. True beauty was never about the color of one's skin or hair. It was a light within the soul, a resilience that could make flowers grow in the harshest soil, and the most profound love, I had learned, often blossoms in the most unexpected of places, a sacred fire that can never be extinguished by the darkness of prejudice.